In this section, we'll be talking about factoring by grouping, which will finish off our factoring methods. So to begin with, we remark that sometimes polynomials with 4 terms, or I guess it would be called a quadrinomial, can be factored by a technique called grouping. So let's try working this example by factoring x cubed minus 2x squared minus 3x plus 6 and factor this by grouping. How do we do this? Well, there's a reason it's called grouping. The way we do this is we group the first terms and the last terms. Now here, be a little careful with the negative. I like to do it this way so that I'm careful with the negative. So make sure there's a plus between your groups. Okay? Now that I've grouped these, the goal here is to pull out a common factor. Pulling out the common factors here, the common factor there is x squared. What do I have left? I have x minus 2 on the inside. And pulling out common factors here, I have negative 3 as a common factor times x plus x minus, because it changes the sign, 2. Now, in other words, we have x squared times x minus 2 minus 3 times x minus 2. And now, since x minus 2 is the same here, we can actually pull it out as a common factor. So we have x squared minus 3 times x minus 2. And this is now fully factored because both of these terms are irreducible. Namely, we can't factor this into integer coefficients. So we're done. It's time for you to try an example, so go ahead and factor this polynomial using grouping. On the count of 3, I'll reveal the answer. 1, 2, 3. So that's a quick practice on how to factor by grouping. Now, grouping is always a good thing to try when you run into trying to factor a polynomial with 4 terms, but it turns out it's also very helpful when factoring trinomials. Now, as far as an example, what we could do is we could factor this with trial and error. However, using grouping, we can actually do this in a much easier way. This employs something called the AC method, and the goal here is to turn this into a polynomial that we can group to factor. However, what you're noticing here is how the heck do we group this? So you're probably asking yourself, how do we group this when we only have 3 terms? Well, the trick here is we're going to split the middle term into 2 terms. How do we figure that out? Well, we use this method called the AC method. Namely, we take A and C and we multiply them together. 2 times negative 3, which is negative 6. Now, we list down the factors of negative 6. So 1 and negative 6, negative 1 and 6. And then we also have the factors 2 and negative 3 and negative 3 and 2. And now we want to figure out which of these pairs of factors add to give me positive 5. Well, we notice here that negative 1 and 6, when added, give me positive 5. So those are the factors I want. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to split 5x into those factors. So I have 2x squared minus x plus 6x minus 3. And then what I do is I group them. And so, proceeding by grouping, I pull out an x out of this. Here I can pull out a 3. And sure enough, I get the same terms here, so I can factor them out as a common factor. And just like that, I was able to factor a trinomial in a much easier way. it's your turn to try this easier method. So on the count of 3, I'll reveal the solution to this. 1, 2, 3. So what we notice here is and so there's a somewhat easier, still a little tedious, but easier way than just trying to guess to factor a trinomial. For more practice in grouping and factoring by grouping, be sure to see the textbook pages A33 and A34, numbers 8 and then 63 through 72. Best of all, we now have all of our basic factoring methods, which means we can factor a lot of different things now. So on that note, if you would like even more practice with factoring, be sure to see page A34 of the textbook and look at numbers 73 through 82. In our next video, we're going to talk about the domain of an algebraic expression.